We all grew up hearing the story. Adam and Eve, a serpent, an apple, and the fateful original sin. It's a narrative ingrained in our collective consciousness, shaping billions of beliefs across cultures and generations. It's taught in Sunday schools, referenced in literature, and underpins vast theological frameworks. But what if the Garden of Eden story, as commonly understood, is missing a crucial, deeply uncomfortable layer? What if the traditional Sunday school version, with its simplistic good versus evil narrative, barely scratches the surface of a far more profound, even audacious, divine intention? Today, we're not just retelling a story. We're peeling back its layers, inviting you to consider a radical proposition. What if God, in His infinite wisdom, wasn't merely setting a simple boundary in Eden, a test of obedience for two naive beings? What if, instead, He was, in fact, the ultimate master of divine psychology, intentionally orchestrating humanity's fall, using sophisticated psychological principles like heterosuggestion and reactance? This isn't about theological debate in the traditional sense, nor is it an attempt to undermine faith. This is about deconstructing a sacred narrative through a radical philosophical and psychological lens. We're going to explore the compelling, albeit controversial idea that God might have been, from an omniscient perspective, bored with a perfect, static paradise, and that He orchestrated events to introduce drama, choice, consequence, and the very concept of good and evil into a creation that, while flawlessly designed, perhaps lacked the dynamic complexity, the moral agency, and the experiential depth we associate with true, sentient existence. Prepare yourselves, because this perspective will undoubtedly challenge your long-held ideologies and engage you in truly thought-provoking questions about divine nature, human purpose, and the very essence of our free will. Before we fully immerse ourselves in this exploration, a crucial disclaimer. This discussion is intended purely as a philosophical and psychological inquiry. It is designed to spark critical thought, foster intellectual curiosity, and open dialogue, not to present a definitive theological declaration or to disrespect anyone's deeply held spiritual beliefs. Our sole aim is to challenge perspectives, invite respectful engagement, and encourage a deeper, more nuanced understanding of ancient texts through a modern psychological lens. We encourage you to keep an open mind, consider the arguments presented, and contribute your thoughts constructively and thoughtfully in the comments below. Let's begin this journey of deconstruction. Picture the Garden of Eden as described in the book of Genesis, a place of unimaginable beauty, boundless abundance, and perfect harmony. Adam and Eve lived there in an innocent state, completely devoid of the knowledge of good or evil. Their existence was one of pure, unadulterated bliss. They simply existed, fulfilling God's initial command to be fruitful and multiply, dwelling in a state of perpetual, unchallenging contentment. This was perfection, yes, but a perfection perhaps lacking the dynamic friction that drives genuine growth, the compelling narrative of a story, and the true sentience that comes from navigating complexity. It was a world without shadows, without choice, without the very concept of overcoming. Crucially, the biblical text indicates there were many trees in this vast, sprawling garden, two of which were specifically named and held unique, profound significance: the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. But here's the often overlooked, yet incredibly vital, detail. There is no indication whatsoever that Adam and Eve paid any special attention to these two trees, or even recognized their unique significance, until God explicitly mentioned them. They were simply part of the verdant landscape, indistinguishable from the countless other fruit-bearing trees that provided sustenance and beauty without consequence. Let's dwell on this point for a moment, because it's absolutely foundational to our argument. For all intents and purposes, the tree of knowledge was initially an inert object in their paradise. It held no special allure, no inherent pull on their attention or desire. Imagine, if you will, a child living in a house filled with countless toys, books, and fascinating objects. Among them, there's one particular item. Let's say a beautiful, intricately carved wooden box, perhaps even a forbidden one, that has always been present, always within reach, but never truly noticed. It just is. It's part of the background noise, an unremarkable piece of the furniture, never generating a flicker of curiosity or desire. Adam and Eve were surrounded by an infinite buffet of delectable fruits from every tree in the garden, and the tree of knowledge was simply another, indistinguishable part of the lush canopy. Its potential, its power, its very existence as something unique, remained entirely unnoticed by their innocent minds. There was no inherent pull, no pre-existing curiosity, no awareness of its unique properties or the profound knowledge it held. It was merely another tree, invisible in its abundance, unremarkable in its presence. Their innocent minds, unburdened by concepts of right or wrong, of choice or consequence, simply processed it as foliage, as a source of sustenance no different from any other. The state of blissful ignorance was absolute, a perfect equilibrium that lacked any internal impetus for change or development. They were perfectly content, perfectly obedient, perfectly static. This initial state of perfect, unchallenging existence, while undeniably good in a simplistic sense, could also be perceived, from a divine, omniscient perspective, as profoundly static. Predictable, perhaps even a little dull. What kind of narrative truly develops when there's no conflict, no choice, no growth born from overcoming adversity? What kind of sentience can truly flourish without the understanding of its opposite? It's a beautiful painting, yes, but perhaps not a compelling story. It's a perfectly tuned instrument, but one that has yet to play a complex melody. The stage was set, not necessarily for a fall in the traditional sense, but for an awakening that absolutely required a catalyst, a spark to ignite the human experience beyond mere existence. And then, the turning point, the divine intervention that irrevocably altered the course of human history. God steps into this pristine, uncomplicated existence with a seemingly straightforward instruction, a single, clear command. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it you will certainly die. Genesis 2 verses 16 to 17. Notice the deliberate focus. He didn't highlight the tree of life, which offered eternal existence, a path to unending, unchallenging bliss. Instead, his singular emphasis was on the one tree that came with a prohibition and a dire consequence. This, my friends, is where the psychological brilliance of the divine narrative truly begins to unfold. This wasn't merely a rule, it was a profound, calculated act of heterosuggestion, a direct, external suggestion designed to reshape perception and ignite desire. It was the divine whisper that transformed the unremarkable into the irresistible. This command, as a heterosuggestion, created the very condition for a perceived threat to freedom, thereby laying the groundwork for a complex psychological dynamic. Let's break down this heterosuggestion and understand its profound impact. God took an unremarkable, previously ignored tree and, through his explicit command, instantly imbued it with immense salience. He didn't just mention it, he spotlighted it. He drew Adam and Eve's attention directly, unequivocally, to the one thing they were forbidden to have, in a garden overflowing with everything they could have. It's the psychological equivalent of placing a vibrant, blinking, "Do not touch" sign on that once unnoticed wooden box in the child's home. Suddenly, the object that was invisible, mundane, or simply part of the background becomes the most fascinating, the most intriguing, the most desirable thing in the entire room. The command itself, far from being a deterrent, suggested the tree's unique importance, its inherent mystery, and its profound, hidden desirability. It whispered of secrets, of power, of a knowledge that superseded all other forms of existence. This isn't just about setting a boundary. It's about making that boundary the central focus, the irresistible enigma in a world of open books. It's an almost deliberate act of highlighting exactly where the potential for drama, for consequence, for a truly transformative experience, lay dormant. By saying, "Do not," God effectively said, "This is the most interesting thing here." So, what happens when you tell a curious, self-aware being, "You absolutely cannot do that"? This command, my friends, directly triggers something called psychological reactance. It's a core human tendency, first theorized by social psychologist Jack Brem back in 1966. Think of it as that unpleasant, almost primal urge that bubbles up when you feel your freedom or autonomy is being threatened. The more you feel that threat, the stronger your desire to get that freedom back. It's why the forbidden fruit doesn't just become desirable. It becomes intensely appealing precisely because it's forbidden. It's that rebellious teenager inside all of us, or the sudden irresistible urge to touch a "do not touch" sign in a museum. That, right there, is reactance at play. Now, this isn't just some vague feeling. Psychological reactance theory, or PRT, is a well-defined framework. Brem and other researchers broke it down into 4 key elements. Think of them as the building blocks that explain why we push back so hard when our freedom is challenged. Perceived freedom. This is simply our belief that we have the autonomy to choose our own actions. In the garden, Adam and Eve were surrounded by virtually unlimited choices. They could eat from any tree, live any way they wanted. That created a powerful sense of freedom, didn't it? And here's a crucial point. For us to even feel this freedom, we have to be aware it exists and believe we're capable of acting on it. Threat to freedom. This is when we perceive that our ability to choose is being restricted or even eliminated. It could be a new rule, a policy, or even someone trying to persuade us a little too forcefully. In Eden, God's singular, stark prohibition regarding the tree of knowledge directly constituted this threat, impeding their freedom to eat from all trees. Reactance. This is that powerful, often uncomfortable emotional and motivational state that kicks in when we feel our freedom is under attack. It's that knee-jerk negative reaction to being told what to do, often characterized by feelings like anger or frustration. This feeling drives us to restore our freedom. The intensity of this feeling is shaped by how we evaluate the source of the restriction and how severe it feels. Restoration of freedom. And finally, restoration of freedom. This is what we do to reclaim our autonomy. The most straightforward way. Simply engaging in the very behavior that was restricted. This is often called the boomerang effect, literally doing the opposite of what you're told, just to prove you can. Now, how intense is this reactance? Well, it depends on 2 big things. How important that threatened freedom feels to you, and how severe the threat is. More severe or intense threats lead to greater reactance. So, back in Eden, think about it, the severity of the threat was death itself. And the implied importance of that forbidden knowledge, as later framed by the serpent, would, according to PRT, absolutely maximize that motivational state of reactance in Adam and Eve. Now, let's talk about the serpent. The traditional narrative presents a literal, talking snake, an external tempter. But what if the serpent was never a literal creature? What if its appearance in the story, immediately after God's command, is not a coincidence but a profound literary device? Where was this serpent all along in a perfect garden? Why did it only emerge, seemingly, the moment the prohibition was given? This timing is critical. What if the serpent is not a physical entity, but a fictional personification of the psychological reactance itself? It's the internal voice, the burgeoning desire, the logical rationalization that arises within Adam and Eve's minds, naturally activated by God's own heterosuggestion. The serpent's temptation isn't an external whisper. It's the internal dialogue of their own minds, grappling with the irresistible pull of the forbidden. It's the manifestation of that psychological pressure to reclaim freedom, to taste the knowledge that has now been made so tantalizingly salient. The serpent's strategy of distorting God's word and challenging the consequence, "You will not surely die," directly diminishes the perceived risk, making disobedience seem less costly. By framing the fruit as something God is withholding to prevent them from becoming like God and gaining wisdom, the serpent elevates the importance of the threatened freedom, further amplifying reactance. Eve's initial exaggeration of God's command, "Neither shall you touch it, lest you die," might even be seen as a nascent sign of this internal struggle and growing reactance. This makes God's setup even more intricate. He didn't just create the rule. He created the conditions for the temptation to arise from within. The serpent, in this view, is a brilliant narrative device to externalize an internal psychological process, making God appear innocent, unaware of what he had set into motion, when in fact, he orchestrated the entire internal conflict. So, the question shifts fundamentally from why did they disobey, to a far more uncomfortable and intriguing query: was disobedience truly avoidable, or was it the predetermined outcome of a divinely orchestrated psychological experiment? Could it be that this wasn't a test they were meant to pass through simple, passive obedience, but a setup they were designed to act upon, a catalyst for humanity to step beyond mere innocence into a realm of active choice, profound experience, and the very essence of what it means to be a conscious, moral agent? The forbidden fruit wasn't a mistake. It was the key to unlocking humanity's true potential. This is where the story truly turns on its head. Are we simply flawed, or are we part of a grander, more complex design, where even the tempter was an internal mechanism? What do you think this interpretation implies about our free will and the nature of temptation? Share your initial reactions in the comments right now. And if this perspective is already blowing your mind, smash that like button and consider subscribing to join our community of truth seekers. This brings us to our most radical, perhaps even audacious, thought. Was God bored? Seriously. It's a question that feels almost blasphemous to utter, yet it's essential for this psychological deconstruction. Imagine, if you can, being omniscient, all-powerful, having created a perfect, static paradise where nothing truly happens beyond blissful, unquestioning obedience. Humanity, in this initial state, was like a perfectly programmed robot, or, as you might put it, a TV show without any plot twists, character arcs, genuine conflict, or the unpredictable beauty of free will in action. A beautiful, yes, but ultimately unchanging, tableau. From an infinite, eternal perspective, perhaps this perfect stasis was simply insufficient for a divine creator seeking a richer, more dynamic, and ultimately more meaningful narrative for his creation. A universe without choice, without consequence, without the struggle for good, might be a perfect mechanism, but it lacks the soul of a story. Here's the crucial, often overlooked point that underpins this entire theory. Why did God even create a tree with a knowledge of good and evil if his absolute, unwavering desire was for humanity to remain perpetually innocent and uninvolved in evil? The very existence of this tree, particularly when combined with the precise prohibition that spotlights it, suggests an underlying, deliberate intention on God's part. It wasn't an oversight or a mistake. It was a fundamental part of the garden's design. This implies that from the genesis of creation, God had always intended to introduce humanity to the duality of good and evil, to choice, to consequence, to the full spectrum of moral awareness, whether that introduction came sooner or later. He didn't merely desire passive, unknowing beings who would simply exist in a state of unthinking compliance. He aimed for beings who could choose, who could experience the full, complex reality of existence, who could navigate a complex, dynamic world, beings capable of genuine moral agency, not just automated compliance. The tree of knowledge wasn't an accident. It was a fundamental component of a grand design, a necessary ingredient for a truly sentient and evolving humanity. This perspective aligns with the concept of a fortunate fall, felix culpa, where the fall is viewed not as a total tragedy but as a blessed event or a necessary step forward in human development. It represents the historical process of human civilization moving from natural selection to ethical selection. The fall becomes a crucial point for humans to learn about the nature and meaning of their existence. It's an ethical tragedy that purifies primitive desires and evokes moral emotions, highlighting the internal struggle within humanity and the necessity of ethical choices. As some interpretations suggest, humans could not legitimately choose the good unless they had a legitimate ability to go their own way. This implies that the knowledge of good and evil was a prerequisite for genuine moral agency and a deeper, more informed relationship with God. As the Apostle Paul wisely writes in Romans 4 verse 15, "For where there is no law, there is no transgression." In a world without the concept of wrong, there can be no sin. By introducing the specific prohibition against eating from the tree of knowledge, God didn't just passively allow sin. He actively introduced the very concept and possibility of sin into creation. He laid the foundational groundwork for conflict, for drama, for the entire sweeping narrative of humanity to begin. He created the conditions for sin to exist, thereby creating the subsequent need for redemption, for grace, for sacrifice, and for the grand story of salvation that has unfolded through millennia. It's the ultimate narrative setup, transforming a static paradise into a dynamic stage for the human drama. This act, far from being a punitive measure, could be seen as the ultimate act of creative storytelling, setting in motion the most epic narrative ever conceived. If this theory of a bored God intentionally introducing evil and even orchestrating the internal temptation makes you uncomfortable, or perhaps illuminates something new, tell me, does the very existence of the tree of knowledge and the reinterpretation of the serpent change how you view God's original plan for humanity? Join the discussion in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. Think about this. Why didn't God's primary instruction, his very first explicit command, focus on the tree of life, saying, "Eat freely from the tree of life and live forever"? Why emphasize the one with the explicit death penalty, the one that would introduce suffering and mortality? The answer, within this provocative framework, becomes strikingly clear. The tree of life offered eternal, blissful monotony, a continuation of the static perfection that perhaps God found creatively limiting. The tree of knowledge, however, offered something far more profound and necessary for his grand design: experience, consequence, drama, and the very essence of what it means to be truly human. The capacity for moral choice, for self-awareness, for a dynamic, evolving relationship with creation and creator. It was the crucial catalyst for the human story to genuinely begin, moving from a static existence to a vibrant, unfolding narrative of growth, challenge, and redemption. It was the necessary spark for humanity to become truly alive, truly sentient, truly capable of a relationship based on choice, not just inherent programming. Now, consider God's reaction immediately after Adam and Eve ate. Was he genuinely surprised, caught off guard by their disobedience? Was he truly consumed by blind fury, devastated by their betrayal? Or was there a subtle, almost imperceptible, knowing smile at the corner of his mouth, a hint of satisfaction that his intricate plan was unfolding precisely as intended? If his anger was truly absolute and his intention was pure, unadulterated prevention, why not intervene more decisively before the act, knowing everything as an omniscient being? He could have simply removed the tree, or rendered it inaccessible, or instilled an unshakable aversion. His anger and subsequent actions in Genesis 3 often read more like a meticulously crafted performance, akin to a wise parent feigning sternness after a child has inevitably touched the hot stove they were warned about, guiding them through the consequences, rather than genuine, blind-sided rage. It's a performance designed to teach, to initiate, to set the stage for the next phase of existence. Then there's the iconic scene of Adam hiding among the trees, and God calling out, "Where are you?" This isn't an omniscient being genuinely lost or searching for information. This is a theatrical setup, a divine charade, a moment of profound psychological insight. He knew precisely where Adam was. He was playing along, allowing the nascent fear, the shame, and the crushing weight of guilt to fully set in, meticulously setting the stage for the next act of humanity's journey outside the garden. This interaction isn't about discovery. It's about allowing Adam to experience the consequence of his choice, to internalize the new knowledge of nakedness and shame. And then, after they've eaten, after the fall, that's when God explicitly mentions the tree of life again, almost as an afterthought, or a final, poignant punchline to his grand design. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever. Genesis 3 verse 22. Why emphasize it now, only as the ultimate reason to expel them from the garden? Why not warn them about it earlier, or offer it as the primary path? It almost feels like the final confirming twist of the knife, solidifying the intentionality of their new, burdened existence outside of pure innocence. It's the closing of one chapter, the static, innocent one, and the deliberate, decisive opening of another, the dynamic, challenging, and ultimately more profound human story. This perspective, while provocative, finds echoes in some Gnostic interpretations of the fall. Gnostic thought often posits a distinction between a higher transcendent being, the true God, and a lower gods, the demiurge, who is responsible for creation and is considered ignorant and evil. In this radical view, the God of Genesis, the Creator, is the demiurge, who seeks to keep humanity ignorant and subservient. From this lens, the serpent is not a tempter but a liberator, or a messenger from the true God, who showed Adam and Eve the truth about their imprisoned condition. The act of eating the forbidden fruit, then, is not a sin but an act of enlightenment, leading to gnosis, knowledge, and spiritual insight. Here, the psych trick is not God's, but the demiurge's attempt to keep humanity unconscious and dull, and trapped in the Garden of Eden. The prohibition is a control mechanism, and the serpent performs the counter-trick or liberation, enabling humans to overcome the demiurge's psychological manipulation. This offers a radical reframing of the entire conspiracy, where what is forbidden by one divine entity is good from the perspective of another. This is the moment that makes you rethink everything. If God's reactions were part of a playbook, and even the serpent was an internal psychological mechanism, or if there's an entirely different divine player at work, what does that say about divine justice or even divine love? This is a heavy question, and I want to hear your most honest thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding these insights as mind-bending as I am, please do me a huge favor. Like this video and hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps these challenging conversations going. If our radical interpretation holds true, then if God intentionally set up this intricate psychological trap, the original sin wasn't truly a failure on humanity's part as much as it was God's deliberate, calculated move to kickstart creation into a dynamic, experiential reality. It wasn't a flaw in humanity, but a feature of the divine plan. And in doing so, He burdened humanity with an eternal, inherited guilt, a fundamental sense of brokenness, imperfection, and a constant longing for redemption that has profoundly shaped religious doctrine, societal norms, and individual psychology for millennia. This, in itself, is perhaps the most pervasive and enduring form of heterosuggestion, a divinely implanted narrative of our inherent flawed nature that continues to influence every aspect of human existence, from our legal systems to our personal struggles with self-worth. It's the unspoken contract, the underlying assumption that defines our relationship with the divine. This is a lot to unpack, isn't it? It challenges so much of what we thought we knew, what we were taught, and what we've accepted as fundamental truths about our origins and our relationship with the divine. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about free will, divine omnipotence, and the very nature of good and evil. The Garden of Eden narrative, when viewed through a psychological lens, offers timeless insights into fundamental human behaviors. It illustrates our inherent drive for autonomy and our often unconscious tendency to resist perceived threats to our freedom, even when the restrictions are minimal or for our own good. It highlights the power of suggestion, heterosuggestion, and the potent impact of framing, as seen in the serpent's manipulation, on human decision-making. The story serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of authority and the potential for causeless rebellion that can lead to self-sabotage. The fact that a psychological theory developed in the 20th century, PRT, so perfectly maps onto a narrative thousands of years old, Garden of Eden, suggests that psychological reactance is not merely a modern phenomenon but an archetypal, deeply ingrained aspect of the human psyche. The psych trick in Eden, if it existed, leverages a fundamental human operating system, making the narrative a profound illustration of universal human nature. Understanding psychological reactance is crucial in various modern domains. In parenting, telling a child, "Don't touch that," might make it more appealing. In marketing, overt persuasion or outright bans can backfire, leading consumers to resist or seek alternatives. In governance, policies perceived as overly restrictive or impinging on personal freedoms can provoke strong public backlash and counterproductive work behaviors. The need for precision in policy wording, particularly regarding topics closely linked to an individual's values, is a direct application of PRT. Even self-imposed rules can trigger reactance, leading to self-sabotage, as seen when individuals resist their own schedules or commitments. If divine commands, or any authority's commands, can be interpreted as psych tricks that leverage inherent psychological tendencies, it places a significant ethical burden on those in positions of power. Whether divine or human, understanding how prohibitions and suggestions can elicit reactance is crucial for responsible leadership, communication, and policymaking. So, what if the Garden of Eden narrative, far from being a simple tale of disobedience and punishment, is a complex, multi-layered account of God, the ultimate psychologist, orchestrating humanity's profound journey into self-awareness, the challenging duality of good and evil, and the messy, beautiful, dramatic, and ultimately meaningful human experience? What if original sin was, in fact, original design, a deliberate and profound turning point in the divine plan for creation, essential for humanity to truly become sentient, moral beings? This interpretation undoubtedly challenges traditional theological frameworks, pushing us beyond simplistic answers. Yet, it offers a new, perhaps more profound, albeit uncomfortable, understanding of divine interaction, human nature, and the very purpose of our existence. It suggests a God who is not just a rule-giver, but a cosmic storyteller, a master strategist, and an architect of profound experience. Now, it's your turn. I am eager to hear your thoughts on this. Does this interpretation resonate with you, or does it provoke strong disagreement? Is this a blasphemous perspective, or does it offer a fresh, albeit challenging, understanding of the Eden story and God's role within it? How does this perspective challenge or affirm your own long-held beliefs about faith, free will, and the nature of good and evil? Share your insights, your arguments, and your questions respectfully in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and learn from each other's perspectives. Don't forget to like this video if it stimulated your thinking, subscribe to the channel for more controversial deconstructions of sacred texts, and hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when we release our next thought-provoking episode. Thank you for joining me on this profound exploration of the hidden depths within sacred narratives.